They found something on my son's tablet. I couldn't believe it. It started like any other chaotic morning. I was half asleep, fumbling with cereal on the counter while my son was hunting for his backpack. My wife was already rushing out the door, grabbing her work iPad and helping him zip up his jacket. I didn't even realize he'd taken her iPad instead of his own. Then about an hour later, I got a call from his teacher. Her voice was shaking, barely steady enough to say, "You need to come to the school right now. And, please, don't bring your wife." When I showed up, there were 2 police cars outside. Inside, they didn't ask me to sit, they told me to. Then an officer slid the iPad across the table and said, "What we found on this device is disturbing." Looking at the screen, everything I thought I knew about my family shattered in an instant. That morning started like any other. I was half asleep, fumbling for my phone by the bed, when I heard little Sarah padding down the hall. She was humming a song she'd made up that morning, all high and silly, completely caught up in her own world. I pulled on a sweatshirt and shuffled to the kitchen while she came bouncing in, still in her pajamas. "Mom, where's my tablet?" she asked, voice bright but a little rushed. "In your room, honey," I said, setting the coffee to brew, already thinking about the emails I had to send before work. "You're up early." She grabbed something off the counter and plopped down at the kitchen table, eyes glued to the screen. I barely glanced over, just nodded, "Have fun." Breakfast was the usual scramble to get eggs on the table before the bus came. I chopped fruit while Sarah munched quietly, swiping her tablet with practiced ease. Her older brother, Jake, threw a jacket over his shoulder, still half eating cereal, muttering about being late. I kissed Sarah goodbye like I'd done 1,000 times before, bending down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Be good today, okay? I'll pick you up." She smiled, a little distracted, thumb moving faster on that tablet. "Okay, Mom." Jake was out the door in a rush, and I rounded up my bag, double-checking I had everything. The morning sun was catching the window just right, the house was calm, and for a moment, I thought nothing could go wrong. But right in that moment, Sarah had grabbed the wrong tablet. She didn't say anything, didn't notice, and neither did I. She slid into the soft plastic case, thumb still scrolling, eyes covering something I never saw. I was out the door, locking the house behind me, thinking that one small mistake wouldn't matter. It did, but not then, not yet. I was at my desk, staring at my computer screen but not really seeing anything, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the school's number. I wasn't expecting anything, probably just a routine thing or maybe a reminder about next week's field trip. So I answered. "Hello, this is Mr. Harris calling from Lincoln Elementary. Is this Mr. Thompson?" The teacher's voice was low and off. There was a hesitation, almost like he was trying to hold something back or maybe thinking twice about what he was about to say. "Yeah, that's me," I said, my stomach tightening without knowing why. "Is everything okay with Jake?" There was this long pause, like he was struggling with how to say what he needed. Then, finally, I think you should come in. As soon as you can." Just hearing that made me swallow hard. I asked if Jake was hurt or sick, but Mr. Harris didn't answer directly. Instead, he just repeated, "It's important. We're concerned about some things that happened today." That was it. No details, just this sinking feeling that I wasn't going to like whatever was coming next. I tried to mask how panicked I felt, but my voice probably came out shakier than I wanted. "Okay, I'll be there in 15 minutes. I hung up and stared at the phone for a while, my mind racing through every possible nightmare. Was Jake in trouble? Had he gotten into some kind of fight? Or worse, maybe something had happened to him and they didn't want to scare me over the phone. I kept replaying Mr. Harris's voice in my head, that weird mix of fear and hesitation. Teachers don't usually sound like that. They're professional, calm, even when bad things happen. So when your kid's teacher sounds scared of your family, something's already wrong. And I didn't get my hopes up that this was something minor. I told my assistant I had to leave, but I barely noticed the questions or the worried looks. My vision tunneled, and all I could think about was getting to the school and finding out what the hell was going on with Jake. The drive over was a blur, but I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like it dragged on forever, and I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call or text just to give me some clue, anything. When I got there, the parking lot was emptier than usual for mid-afternoon. I spotted Mr. Harris standing near the main entrance, pacing, glancing around. His face was pale, and when I finally walked up, he avoided looking at me directly. Mr. Thompson, he started, voice shaking just a bit. Thank you for coming so quickly. I nodded, trying to stay calm, but my heart was hammering. Can you just tell me what's going on? He swallowed and glanced toward the school doors like someone might overhear. It's Jake. Something happened in class today. Something unusual. We're worried about him. Worried how? I asked, though it felt like the answer might break me. He paused, then said, he didn't say much, but there were moments, things in his behavior, things he said. I think it goes deeper than just a bad day. It's like he's scared, or maybe hiding something. I blinked, trying to understand. Scared? Hiding something? My son. My kid who's always been so quiet, so careful. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just a scrape or a bad grade. I shook my head, confused and more anxious by the second. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't anyone tell me earlier? Mr. Harris looked genuinely torn, almost like he wanted to tell me everything, but was holding back. We weren't sure how to handle it. At first, we thought it was just some kid stress, but then it got worse as the day went on. That's when we decided you needed to know. I wanted to ask what worse even meant, but the knot in my throat stopped me. Instead, I just said, okay, let's talk somewhere quiet. We moved down the hall to an empty classroom. He shut the door behind us, keeping his voice low. Jake said some things that don't add up. He mentioned people who he says bother him outside school. But no one else has seen anything, and he won't be clear. I could feel my heart twisting with every word. It wasn't just about school anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt threatening but invisible. Has he answered when you asked what's going on? I asked, voice barely more than a whisper. He shook his head. No. He shuts down, or he changes the subject. And that's when I felt it. The full weight of not knowing. The fear twisting into something colder and sharper. Because if Jake was scared, hiding, maybe even being threatened, I didn't know if I could protect him. Not yet. Not like this. I kept staring at Mr. Harris, trying to find some hope in his face, but it was all uncertainty and worry. I thought I was walking into something small, fixable, but the way the teacher looked at me, like maybe nothing would ever be the same anymore. That's when I realized this was already way bigger than I'd ever imagined. When I pulled up to the school, the first thing I saw was the flashing blue and red lights outside the main entrance. A couple of police cruisers parked awkwardly, blocking the drop-off lane. I felt my stomach knot up, but I told myself to stay calm. This was school. They handle kids every day. Nothing I couldn't deal with. I rushed inside. The hallway had this weird, quiet energy, like everyone was holding their breath. Teachers were clustered in small groups, whispering, glancing over at me when they thought I wasn't looking. I nodded at a few, but didn't get any straight answers. One of the staff members finally caught up with me, nervously tugging me aside. Your son's safe? She said fast, then lowered her voice. We found him in the library. Police want to talk to you after. Safe, but still in the library. My heart was already racing, and I was desperate to find him. I didn't even ask questions. I just followed her down the hall, pushing past the lingering crowd and the buzz of subdued conversations. The smell of cleaning products mixed with the faint smell of crumpled paper and the dull scent of anxiety hung heavy in the air. They brought me to this small room off the library. When I stepped in, I caught sight of my son sitting alone, his back ramrod straight. His hair was messy like he'd run his fingers through it 100 times, and his hands were folded neatly on his lap, but it was his face that hit me so hard. He wasn't crying. No trembling lips, no quivering hands. Just this blank, faraway look, like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to. His eyes found mine, but they weren't the bright spark I was used to. They were hollow, like he was watching something no child should ever see. I sat down beside him, reaching out slowly to touch his arm, and he flinched slightly. Not in pain, something else. Fear, confusion, I guess. Hey, buddy, I said softly. What happened? Are you okay? He didn't answer at first, just stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was going to run away or not. Maybe he thought I couldn't protect him, even though I was right there. The silence dragged on until his voice finally broke through, low and shaky. There was a man. I swallowed the lump in my throat. My brain spun, grasping for details, warnings, anything that might explain what he was about to say next. His eyes dropped to the floor. He said things, mean things, and then he tried to get close. That's when my protective instinct kicked in hard. I wanted to yell, to scream, to make whoever did this pay, but I barely managed a shaky breath. I squeezed his shoulder, trying to ground us both in that terrible moment. Did anyone help you? Did you call for a teacher? He shook his head. I didn't know what to do. Hearing that broke something in me. Not the "I wish I could have stopped it" kind of break. Something deeper, like failure. Like I hadn't taught him to be safe. Like I was supposed to be the one keeping him from the world's worst things, and I'd failed. The door creaked open. A detective stepped inside, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking between me and my son with clinical suspicion. We're going to need to ask some questions. I looked back at my son, whose hands were now trembling slightly. I wanted to shield him from all of this, the cops, the questions, the coldness, but I knew I couldn't. He suddenly pulled away from me and stood up, wobbly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to talk. That was it. The moment shifted. I wasn't just a dad anymore. I was a mess of rage and confusion, trying to hold it together for a kid who'd just had his whole world twisted upside down. The detective nodded slowly, stepping back, but the tension between us didn't ease one bit. My son looked like he wanted to disappear, and I felt utterly lost. This wasn't just a school day anymore. It was something darker, something I never could have predicted. And all I could do was sit there, watching him, wondering how I was going to fix it. Because I was supposed to be his safe place, but right now, I wasn't sure I even knew how. The detective motioned for me to follow him down a narrow hallway I hadn't seen before. It wasn't like the main interview room or the waiting area. This office felt different, more personal, quieter, like it was meant for conversations you didn't want anyone overhearing. My hands were still shaking a little, and I kept trying to steady my breathing. When we got inside, he closed the door behind us and sat down at a small desk. He pulled something from his bag and set it there, the iPad. It looked just like the one I'd seen in my son's backpack earlier, but the screen was facing up this time. I leaned closer, heart pounding, trying to read what was on it. The wallpaper caught me first. It was a photo, the one from our wedding day. The garden where we got married, everyone smiling, me and her right in the middle. My breath hitched before my brain even had a chance to catch up with what my eyes were telling me. This wasn't just any iPad. It was hers. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared, my mind spinning, trying to find some kind of explanation. I know it's hers because that wallpaper. It's the only picture she ever used. She set that after our honeymoon. Nobody else would know to do that. The detective's voice was low, but firm, like the calm before something bad. Suddenly, all these mismatched thoughts crashed in. Why would this iPad be with my kid? Why was she sharing something so personal with him? Or maybe, why was he keeping something so private from me? I had always trusted her, trusted us, but now that faith was unraveling in the worst way. A terrible kind of silence filled the room, the kind that doesn't need words but screams everything. I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. Finally, I managed. Why did you bring me here with this? It felt like asking the most dangerous question in the world. The detective looked at me straight in the eyes, and his calmness made my skin crawl. Because what's on this iPad? It changes everything, he said. And you deserve to know before it gets worse. That phrase, before it gets worse, stuck in my chest like a stone. I didn't want to believe that something worse was coming, but part of me knew it already was. I glanced back at the screen. The wallpaper was a quiet reminder of everything that used to be. Now, it just felt like a trap. I wanted to reach out, shut the iPad off, pretend none of it existed. But I couldn't. My fingers itched to swipe, to unlock. I needed to see for myself. The detective didn't press me, just waited. I took a deep breath and hit the home button. The screen flickered, revealing the home page, and then I saw a folder named Secrets. I swallowed hard. This wasn't some ordinary kid's device. This was a mess, a buried chest of things she'd hidden. And I was about to open it. My heart was flipping from confusion to suspicion, and then that eerie calm that settles when you accept there's no turning back. I knew whatever I found next wouldn't just be inconvenient. It would be devastating. I hesitated, one finger hovering over the folder. The detective's quiet presence filled the room, but all I felt was a cold pressure building inside. For the first time, I understood that this moment wasn't about answers. It was about facing what no parent ever wants to see. And I realized, as much as I wanted to stop, I was already too deep. I wasn't prepared for what I saw on that iPad. I thought I was finally going to find something simple, something to explain what was really going on, but it was worse. Way worse. The screen lit up, and the first thing I noticed wasn't the details. It was the mess of codes, names, numbers, and encrypted messages sliding past so fast it made my head spin. I froze, like moving was suddenly impossible. I tried focusing on one thing. A video clip popped up. It wasn't explicit, nothing that you'd expect in a horror movie or thriller. But the weight of it crushed me all the same. It was evidence of everything I was afraid might be true. Secret deals, shady transfers, communications that felt like betrayal licking at the edges of something I barely understood. The kind of stuff you don't ever want to see coming from someone you thought you could trust. I stared at the screen, and my heart started pounding so loud I was sure it was giving me away. Then, as if that wasn't enough, I saw the timestamp. The exact minute this had been recorded. And the chilling part? The angle. It was taken in a way only someone very close could have gotten. Intimate, unguarded, real. It wasn't what I saw that broke me. It was realizing who had recorded it. The betrayal hit harder than any of the financial crimes or secret conversations slipping through my hands like sand. It was like the trust inside me was suddenly hollow, a shell cracking open. My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I scrolled through the rest of the files. Hidden videos buried deep, messages exchanged in whispers, their meaning glaring at me with toxic clarity. It was hard to breathe. My chest tightened, and every piece of me wanted to scream or run away. But I stayed, frozen, like I had no choice. I kept telling myself, this isn't real, but my eyes didn't lie. Every secret laid bare was like a punch I wasn't ready for. I thought back to all the conversations, all those late nights when things fell off, but I didn't want to push or ask too much. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Part of me always hoped I was wrong, and now that hope was bleeding dry. It wasn't just shady business anymore. It was a betrayal so personal it made my skin crawl. I felt stupid for ignoring the signs, for pretending I could handle it if I just looked away. My hand slid over the screen again, desperate to find something redeeming. Nothing. Even the quietest corner of this mess screamed deception. I swallowed hard, the hollow feeling in my stomach turning cold, then stretching out like ice. I wanted to close it. I wanted to unsee it. But somehow, the more I looked, the more the walls of my world collapsed inward. There was this moment, this fractured pause, where I thought I could still undo it, grab the pieces of what I thought was real and hold on to them. But it wasn't there anymore. Only this mess, these shadows. My mind tangled with every secret they kept, every lie they told. And the worst part? Knowing that I was probably the only one who'd ever see this, the only one who would feel this sharp twist of being so close, and completely shut out. I lowered the iPad slowly, the weight of everything settling in my chest like concrete. My hands weren't shaking as much now, but it was worse, more empty. The shock was giving way to a deep, cold hollow I didn't know how to fill. I wanted to shout, but the words stuck inside, like they were swallowed by the silence filling the room. I thought it was over after that. I was quiet, numb, waiting for the next step, but the silence that followed said otherwise. They sat me down in that cold interrogation room like I was already guilty of something. The walls felt like they were closing in before they even asked a single question. The officer just stared at me for a moment, like waiting for the truth to spill out. But what truth? I didn't know what to say without betraying everyone I loved, and I don't think I could have handled it if I'd said too much. The first question was simple. Where were you the night of the incident? I told them the truth, the bare minimum. Quiet, mechanical. I stuck to facts that couldn't be wrong or twisted. I was at my apartment, alone, watching TV. My answer was flat, and I knew it sounded rehearsed, but honesty without pain was all I could manage. They kept pressing, their eyes sharp and bored with my silence. Then they asked about her. The victim. Her name slipped out like a fuse. There she was, the reason all this was happening. I froze. I wanted to say, there must be a mistake, but her name was right there on the report in black and white. I watched the officer's face and felt my chest tighten. How could I say anything without seeming suspicious? How could I keep my family safe if I helped them? They asked if I knew anything that could help, if I'd seen or heard something. Every time I shook my head, part of me cracked. I could almost picture her face, the fear she must have felt, and the weight of my silence got heavier. But if I talked, if I blurted out what I knew, who could I trust not to tear my family apart? I'm supposed to protect them, right? Even if it kills me inside. The officer's voice dragged me back. Are you hiding something? Their tone didn't ask, it accused. I tried to stay calm. No, I said flatly. But inside, I was drowning. I felt like a coward, but also like I had no choice. It was like being stuck between a rock and a hard place that just kept squeezing tighter. Every second in that room, I wanted to scream or run, but I couldn't. I thought about my parents, how they always depended on me to keep things together. If I cracked now, everything would fall apart. The fear twisted inside me, but the thought of losing them was worse than the guilt gnawing at my gut. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept my face blank, even when their questions became sharper, less patient. At some point, the room felt colder. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to stay still on the table, hoping they'd believe I was just tired or nervous. I wanted to say something, to explain that I wasn't part of this nightmare, but the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't sure if I was protecting my family or just hiding from a truth I couldn't face. Maybe both. The officers left me alone for what felt like hours. Every second I sat there, the silence pressed harder. I kept picturing her, the way I never wanted to imagine anyone hurting like that. I kept thinking maybe I should have spoken up before, maybe I could have stopped this, but I never did. I just thought if I kept quiet, it wouldn't reach me. Now, it was right in my hands, and I didn't know if I could do anything but watch it burn from the sidelines. Then they came back with more questions, and I saw the same expectant look I'd seen before. I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. My mind went blank for a moment. Part of me wanted to collapse, to confess everything and be done with it. But I didn't. I just nodded when they demanded answers, the weight of that choice settling like a stone in my stomach. I told myself it was for them, all those people I couldn't lose. But as I sat there, alone in that sterile room, I realized I was losing myself, piece by piece, in everything I wouldn't say. I shut the car door behind me and slid into the driver's seat without saying a word. The classroom had emptied out already, just me now, and the faint echo of everything I couldn't undo. I glanced in the rearview mirror once. My son was tucked into his car seat, breathing steady, dreaming, or just pure exhaustion, I don't know. His eyelids fluttered like the light was about to catch him off guard, but he stayed asleep. That should have hit me harder, seeing him so calm. Instead, my mouth felt dry, and my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there with the key between my fingers, the silence of the parking lot pressing in on me like a physical weight. I wanted to scream or cry, something, anything, but my throat was a cage. So I turned the key and pulled away slowly, leaving the school behind without a backward glance. I didn't have a destination in mind, didn't care where I was going. The streets blurred past like I was watching a muted movie, which maybe I was. I didn't recognize much out the window. Every stoplight, every quiet block, just reminded me that life hadn't stopped, that the world outside my head was still moving even when mine felt fractured. I caught myself looking at my son every so often, not because he needed me, no, just to make sure he was still there, still breathing. But each time I looked, it felt like a reminder of what I'd failed to protect, something I couldn't fix with hugs or promises. I wanted to reach back there, shake him awake, explain that I was sorry, that I was so sorry he had to live through that day with me. But he was untouchable in sleep, and I was stuck in this numb space that wouldn't let me move forward or break down. The world didn't end with noise. It just faded out, like the lights in the city dimmed a little and the sharp edges dulled. I tried to collect my thoughts, tried to figure out what to do next, but my mind refused to settle. It was like my brain was scrambling random pieces of a puzzle that wouldn't form the picture I needed. I clung to the shift of the tires, the hum of the engine, the faint scent of my coffee from earlier, and the way the car smelled like us, familiar, but somehow alien in this moment. I parked on a quiet side street, still didn't turn off the engine. I stared out at the empty sidewalk, watching some paper tumble across the pavement, carried by a soft wind. I imagined it was my thoughts, blown away, lost somewhere beyond my reach. A wave of relief hit me, weak and fleeting, like I was free for just a second from the weight I didn't even fully understand yet. But then it came back, heavier and sharper, twisting in my gut like a cold knot. I ran my hand through my hair and looked back again into the mirror, his little chest rising and falling slowly. That was the only thing holding me to reality. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but even the idea of hearing a voice felt impossible. Every sound around me was just background noise to the storm inside. Maybe that was the worst part. Not knowing how to fix this. Not knowing if I ever could. There was this sick part of me trying to convince myself I could tough it out. That tomorrow I'd find some way to explain everything. maybe even make it better. But the pause after the thought was long and empty. I wasn't sure I believed it. I wasn't sure I believed I could ever be okay again. The headlights from a passing car flickered over my face, and for a moment, I saw myself, the man behind the wheel broken into fragments I didn't recognize. The son asleep behind me was miles away from this fractured version of his father. I turned the wheel abruptly and started moving again. Looking out the window, the streetlights stretched in cold lines. I wanted to disappear into the dark, to stop feeling all this cracked mess inside me. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I thought it was over. But the silence that followed said otherwise. I drove up to the house and just stopped. Didn't get out. Didn't even unlock the door. The engine ticked softly. I sat there, like I didn't have anywhere else to be, watching her through the windshield. She was on the porch, waving to the neighbors like this was just another sunny afternoon. She looked so normal, smiling, laughing even, the way she always did before everything fell apart. Like the world hadn't cracked wide open just minutes before. It hit me then how wrong that was. How that normalcy made her feel worse, almost monstrous. Because while she was out there, shaking hands and chit-chatting, I was sitting here, knowing everything. The lies, the betrayal. The neighbor across the street was holding their dog on a leash, and the little kid peeking from behind them caught my eye. She noticed me watching and smiled without a hint of suspicion, just pure neighborly kindness. I couldn't look away, but I wanted to disappear at the same time. Like I was an intruder, an outsider in my own life. I touched the steering wheel, my fingers stiff from the cold glass, and my chest tightened like the air had been sucked out of the car. Every wave she gave, every laugh, tore through me. It was so quiet out there, birds chirping, the wind shifting, and inside the car, my thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. She was right there, so close, but I might as well have been on the moon. The distance felt endless. I caught myself thinking maybe I should just get out, walk up, say something. But what would I even say? The truth? That I saw the messages, the photos? That I knew about everything she so carefully hid? I could almost hear her voice in my head, casual and bright. Hey, want a drink? Like nothing was wrong, like I wasn't collapsing inside. The porch light flickered as the sun started to dip, casting long shadows across the yard, and her silhouette moved with that familiar grace. It was maddening how much I missed it. How I wanted to yell at her, beg her to remember what we had, while knowing it was already gone. I leaned back in the seat, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter, nails digging in almost painfully. I saw her look over at the window of the car. Our eyes met for a split second. No recognition. Just that polite neighbor smile. Like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. I hated that moment more than anything. The way she could pretend everything was fine. The way life kept moving around us while I stayed frozen in this mess. Only then did the cold really sink in. The one that wasn't just from the evening air. It was the chill of knowing the person you thought you knew could be the stranger. So close, so cold. I wished the car had shields, something to protect me from this pain, or at least hide me from her. I started the engine again, slowly, and the noise broke the silence around us. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. Just waved one last time before disappearing inside the house. The door shut behind her with that soft, but final click. I sat there, engine running, heart pounding loud in my ears, feeling smaller than I ever had. Watching her walk away from me, fully unaware that the secret she carried was already out. Not even a hint. She looked so normal it made everything, feel impossible to believe. I thought about driving off, leaving it all behind. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. Quiet. Waiting. Not sure if I was waiting for her to come back out or for something else to break in the silence. I thought it was over. But the silence that followed said otherwise. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. I had my duffel bag half packed on the floor, just the essentials, a few clothes, my phone charger, some cash I'd stashed away a couple weeks ago. I wasn't making a scene, no big dramatic goodbye. That wasn't me anymore. I just needed to get out. Before I left, I grabbed a pen and tore a page from a notebook. I didn't want him to wake up to silence, to wonder if I just slipped out in the night. So I wrote a note, simple. I told him I loved him, that he should be brave and keep being the good kid he was, and that this wasn't about him. I didn't explain why. How do you explain that to an 8-year-old? How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? I folded the note neatly and slipped it onto his pillow. His breath was even, peaceful. He didn't know I was leaving. I didn't want to shake his world any more than it already was. I looked at his face for a long time. The way the morning light caught his hair, the slight crease on his forehead he got when he was concentrating on a dream. That's the kid I remembered before everything fell apart. And maybe that's why I didn't want to wake him up. I didn't want to see the confusion in his eyes. Not today. The silence in the room was thick. I packed the last things without making a sound. Toothbrush, a sweater, the photo of us from 2 years ago, before the nights got heavy. My throat was tight, like I'd swallowed something that wouldn't let me breathe right. I stood up and glanced around the small apartment. It smelled faintly of coffee and old laundry, but it was ours, was what we called home. I shouldn't be leaving it like this. Maybe I was running. I know it looks that way, but sometimes running feels like the only kind of moving forward there is. I pulled on my jacket and slipped my feet into worn-out sneakers. I felt a sudden swell of regret, like I was ripping a thread that couldn't be sewn back. But there's a line you can't cross twice before it snaps. I crossed it once. That was enough. I hesitated by the door, hand on the handle, and my mind spun through every argument, every apology that wasn't enough. I thought about calling him, explaining, making promises I couldn't keep. But the truth is, I'm not who I used to be. I can't fix what's broken by sticking around. Before turning the knob, I took a breath, long and slow, like bracing myself for the cold. I slid the door shut behind me without a sound. Outside, the air was heavy but steady. No shouting, no doors slamming, just the quiet scrape of my bag against the pavement. I didn't look back. Not once. Some truths don't need justice. They just need distance. I guess I'm the one who needed to step away. Maybe someday I'll explain. But not today. The city was waking up around me. People rushing past, caught up in their own lives. Somehow, that made me feel both smaller and freer at the same time. I was alone now, but maybe finally on my way to something else. I didn't know where I'd go, or how long it would be before I felt okay again. But I had to believe that walking away was the only way to start over. And as I disappeared down the street, my phone buzzed quietly in my pocket. A message from my son's school, I realized. But I didn't check it. Not yet. The weight in my chest didn't lighten, but something inside steadied. This was the end of the chapter one never wanted to write, and maybe the beginning of one I hadn't dared to imagine. I thought maybe the hardest part was just leaving, but the silence that followed said otherwise. I left town that morning before anyone else was awake. The sky was still that gray that makes everything look flat and tired, like the world's been waiting for a reason to start moving again, but couldn't find one. I sat in the car for a long time after I turned the engine off, just staring at the street where my kid's bike still rested against the curb, half buried under leaves. It hit me then, the weight of everything we lost before any of us really knew it was gone. Driving away wasn't easy, but staying wasn't an option. I didn't have to look back at the empty house or the silence that filled it up better than any voice ever had. The memories came anyway, uninvited. I kept thinking about him, my son. The way his laughter used to fill that place, how innocent and whole he seemed. Now it felt like those were just echoes rewritten by time and pain. The kid who trusted everything and everyone, that kid was gone. And in some ways, if I'm honest, so was I. I pulled over on the side of the road when the sky started bleeding light, and I let my hands rest on the steering wheel, trembling without knowing it. I thought about all the what-ifs. What if I'd done more? What if I hadn't looked away when things started to break? But those questions didn't bring answers. They just carved deeper shadows inside me. I wanted to scream or cry, but nothing surfaced except this quiet, hollow kind of ache, the kind that aches forever. When I finally moved again, I found a place far from everything familiar. Nothing was like home there, but that was kind of the point. I wasn't looking for comfort. I just needed a place that didn't remind me of what I lost every time I blinked. The first night, I sat in the dark, listening to the silence. Not the heavy, accusing silence back home, but a quiet that settled over me like a heavy blanket. It was strange, almost peaceful in a way I couldn't have imagined days before. It wasn't like the past months didn't haunt me. Every breath still tasted like regret, but this new silence didn't demand that I fix anything. It didn't ask that I pretend or explain or cover for anyone else. It was just this steady, endless quiet. I realized then that I couldn't protect him anymore, not from everything. And maybe that's the hardest part. I lost my son in that silence, and somehow, I lost a part of myself too. Still, in that dark room, I found something unexpected, a space where I didn't have to mask how broken I was. I didn't have to be the guy who had everything together for once. I could just be me, with all the mistakes and the grief swirling around inside like a storm I wasn't sure would ever calm. But sitting there, breathing in the silence, I felt a whisper of something else, maybe acceptance. Not the kind that erases pain, but the kind that says, this is real, and you're still here. I thought about my son again, and how I used to think home was a place, a building, a neighborhood, a street with familiar sounds. But I see now it's not that simple. Home is where you can still close your eyes and not be afraid. Where you can let your walls fall down just long enough to breathe, without wondering who's going to take something else away from you next. I don't have that yet, not fully. But maybe this quiet, this empty space, can be the start. I'm not sure what the future holds, if there's a way to put the pieces back together, or if they'll always be messy and sharp. But tonight, as I lie here alone, I'm less afraid of the dark. I'm not pretending I'm okay. I'm just sitting with the truth that some things change forever. The silence doesn't feel so empty anymore. It feels like freedom in a way I never thought I'd find. And for the first time in a long time, I think maybe that's enough.